Sometimes the smallest hands carry the biggest secrets. Sometimes a child's innocent smile hides a cry for help that could shake the very foundations of a kingdom. In the grand halls of Buckingham Palace, where every movement is watched, every word is measured, and every protocol is sacred, something extraordinary was about to happen. A 7-year-old girl with pigtails and a worn teddy bear was about to do what no diplomat, no politician, and no adult had ever managed to do. She was about to make the royal guard break their most sacred rule. What started as a simple family visit to see the changing of the guard would become a story that would spread across the globe, reminding us all that sometimes the most important messages come from the most unexpected messengers. This is the true story of how one little girl's courage and one guard's humanity created a moment that would be remembered forever. The morning began like any other at Buckingham Palace, but by afternoon, the world would witness something that had never happened in the 500-year history of the Royal Guard. What was in that secret message? And why did it make a soldier, trained to stand motionless for hours, abandon centuries of tradition in broad daylight? This is that story. 7-year-old Emma Johnson pressed her small nose against the cold window of the London bus, watching the grand buildings of the city roll by, like scenes from a fairy tale. Her breath fogged the glass as she traced invisible letters with her finger, practicing the words she had been working on for weeks. Today was the day she had been dreaming about since her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had shown the class pictures of Buckingham Palace during their lesson about British history. Emma lived in a small flat in Manchester with her grandmother, Rose, who worked 2 jobs just to keep them afloat. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was only 3 years old, leaving her in the care of her father's mother, a woman whose heart was as big as her bank account was small. Rose Johnson was a cleaner at the local hospital during the day and stocked shelves at a grocery store 3 nights a week. She rarely complained, but Emma could see the tiredness in her grandmother's eyes when she thought no one was looking. Rose had been putting away every spare penny in an old tea tin hidden behind the flour in their tiny kitchen. She had promised Emma that for her 7th birthday they would take the train to London and see the Queen's Guards. It was a promise that had kept both of them going through the long, difficult months when the heating bill was too high, or when dinner was just beans on toast again. Emma had spent weeks preparing for this trip. She had checked out every book about the royal family from the Manchester Public Library. She knew that the guards wore red coats called tunics and tall black hats made of bearskin. She knew they carried rifles and stood perfectly still no matter what happened around them. She had read that they were not allowed to smile, talk, or move unless there was a real emergency. But Emma also knew something else. She had learned from her research that these guards were real people with real families. They had children and grandparents and people they loved, just like she loved her grandmother. This knowledge had given her an idea, one that had been growing in her mind for weeks. As the bus pulled up to their stop near Buckingham Palace, Emma clutched her small backpack tighter. Inside was her most precious possession, a worn teddy bear named Sir Snuggles that had belonged to her father when he was a boy. But more importantly, tucked carefully in the bear's small jacket pocket, was a folded piece of paper. On it, in Emma's careful 7-year-old handwriting, was a message that she hoped would somehow make a difference. Rose took Emma's hand as they stepped off the bus. The older woman was wearing her best dress, a navy blue one that she had owned for 15 years but only wore to church and special occasions. Her grey hair was neatly pinned back, and she had even put on a little lipstick for their big day out. Emma could tell her grandmother was excited too, even though Rose was trying to act calm and grown up. The crowds around Buckingham Palace were thick with tourists from all over the world. Emma heard people speaking in languages she didn't recognize, and she saw families taking pictures in front of the grand golden gates. Street performers entertained small groups of onlookers, and vendors sold miniature British flags and postcards. The energy was electric, and Emma felt her heart beating faster with excitement. But as they got closer to the palace gates, Emma noticed something that made her excitement mix with sadness. She saw other families like hers, grandparents with grandchildren, single parents with tired eyes, families who looked like they had saved for months just to be there, just like she and her grandmother had. She saw a little boy about her age whose shoes had holes in them, and a girl who was sharing a single ice cream cone with her 2 younger brothers. Emma realized that she and her grandmother were not the only ones who had made sacrifices to be there that day. There were others who had counted pennies and saved and hoped, all for a chance to see something magical, something that would give them a story to tell and a memory to treasure. This realization made Emma's mission feel even more important. The message in her teddy bear's pocket was not just for her anymore. It was for all of them. For every child who had ever felt small in a big world. For every grandparent who worked extra hours to make dreams come true. For every family who had ever had to choose between heating and happiness. As they found a good spot near the gates where the changing of the guard ceremony would take place, Emma began to study the soldiers who were already in position. They stood like statues, their red uniforms bright against the grey London sky. Their faces were serious and focused, looking straight ahead, as if nothing else in the world existed. Emma watched them carefully, trying to understand what it must be like to stand so still for so long. Did their feet hurt in those heavy black boots? Did they think about their families while they stood there? Did they ever wonder about the children who came to watch them? Or were they too focused on their duty to notice? The crowd was growing larger around them, and Emma had to stand on her tiptoes to see over the adults in front of her. Rose lifted her granddaughter onto her shoulders, even though Emma was getting too big for that, and it made Rose's back ache. From her new vantage point, Emma could see everything clearly. She could see the guard who would become the center of her story, though she didn't know it yet. He was tall and young, probably not much older than her cousin David, who was away at university. There was something about his posture that seemed different from the others. While all the guards stood at attention, this one seemed to hold himself with extra care, as if he was thinking about someone else besides himself. Emma had no way of knowing that guard James Mitchell was indeed thinking about someone else. 23 years old and from a small town in Yorkshire, James had joined the Royal Guard because his late grandfather had served with distinction in the same regiment 50 years earlier. Every day when he put on his uniform, James thought about his grandfather's stories and tried to honor the family tradition. But James was also thinking about his little sister, Lucy, who was fighting leukemia in a hospital back home. Lucy was 8 years old, just 1 year older than Emma, and she had been in and out of treatment for the past year. James sent most of his salary home to help with Lucy's medical bills, living on very little so his family could have more. Lucy had made James promise to stand extra straight and be extra brave when he was on duty, because she said that when she saw pictures of him in his red coat, it made her feel stronger. James kept that promise every single day, but the weight of worry about his sister made the hours of standing at attention feel even longer. As Emma watched the guards from her perch on her grandmother's shoulders, she began to feel a deep sense of connection to these men who seemed so distant and untouchable. She understood what it meant to worry about someone you loved. She understood what it meant to try to be strong when you felt small and scared inside. The changing of the guard ceremony was about to begin, and Emma knew this was her moment. She had one chance to deliver her message, and she was going to take it. She whispered to her grandmother that she needed to get down, and Rose carefully lowered her to the ground. Emma pulled Sir Snuggles from her backpack and held him close to her chest. She could feel the piece of paper crinkled up in the bear's pocket, and she took a deep breath to calm her nerves. Around her, the crowd was pressing closer to the gates, everyone trying to get the best view of the ceremony. The military band began to play, and Emma knew there was no turning back. She was about to attempt something that no child had ever tried before. She was about to see if a guard trained to ignore the world around him could be touched by the innocence and hope of one small girl with a very big heart. As the first notes of the ceremonial music filled the air, Emma began to make her way through the crowd, clutching Sir Snuggles and carrying with her the hopes and dreams of every small person who had ever wished they could make a difference in the world. She didn't know if her plan would work, but she knew she had to try. The ceremony was beginning, and Emma Johnson was about to become part of history. The sound of marching boots on cobblestone echoed through the courtyard as the new guard began their approach to Buckingham Palace. Emma felt the vibration of their synchronized steps through the soles of her small shoes as she carefully made her way closer to the front of the crowd. The tourists around her were busy taking photos and videos, their attention focused on the spectacle of the ceremony rather than one small girl with a teddy bear. Emma's heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone around her could hear it. She had practiced this moment in her bedroom mirror dozens of times, but standing here in front of the actual guards, with hundreds of people watching, felt completely different. Her palms were sweaty as she gripped Sir Snuggles, and she had to remind herself to breathe normally. The changing of the guard ceremony at Buckingham Palace was a precisely choreographed ritual that had been performed the same way for centuries. Every movement, every step, every gesture was planned and practiced until it became as natural as breathing. The guards took their positions with military precision, their faces set in expressions of complete concentration and discipline. Guard James Mitchell took his position at the front right of the formation just as he had done dozens of times before. But today felt different somehow. Perhaps it was the letter he had received from his sister Lucy that morning, delivered to the barracks just before his shift began. In her shaky 8-year-old handwriting, Lucy had written about how much she missed him and how she dreamed of being strong enough to visit London and see him in his red coat. Lucy had drawn a picture with her letter, a stick-figure drawing of James in his guard uniform, standing tall and proud. At the bottom, she had written, "My brother is a hero who protects the Queen and makes me brave." James had folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his uniform pocket, right over his heart. As he stood at attention, James tried to focus on his duty, but his thoughts kept drifting to his sister in her hospital bed. He wondered if the treatment was working, if she was eating enough, if she was scared when the nurses came in at night. The weight of being so far away from her during the most difficult time of her life pressed down on him heavier than any military equipment he had ever carried. Emma noticed this particular guard immediately. While all the soldiers looked serious and focused, there was something in this one's posture that spoke to her. Maybe it was the way he held his head, just slightly tilted, as if he was listening for something far away. Maybe it was the almost invisible tension in his shoulders that suggested he was carrying more than just the weight of his rifle. Whatever it was, Emma felt drawn to him specifically. She had originally planned to approach whichever guard was closest to her, but now she knew exactly who needed to receive her message. She began to work her way through the crowd, using her small size to slip between groups of adults who were too busy watching the ceremony to pay attention to her movements. Her grandmother Rose was still standing where Emma had left her, stretched up on her tiptoes trying to see over the taller people in front of her. Rose assumed Emma was just trying to get a better view like everyone else, and she didn't realize her granddaughter was planning something that would change both their lives forever. The ceremony continued with its usual pageantry. The guards who were being relieved stood perfectly still as their replacements took their positions. Commands were shouted in crisp, authoritative voices. The crowd watched with fascination and took photos, treating the guards more like tourist attractions than real people with real lives and real feelings. Emma finally reached the front of the crowd, separated from the guards only by a low rope barrier and about 6 feet of cobblestone courtyard. She was close enough now to see the details of their uniforms, the brass buttons polished to a mirror shine, the perfect creases in their red tunics, the way their bearskin hats cast shadows over their eyes. She was also close enough to see something that the other tourists missed. She could see the slight tremor in James Mitchell's jaw that suggested he was fighting some internal battle. She could see the way his knuckles were white where he gripped his rifle, as if he was holding on to more than just his weapon. Emma had spent weeks thinking about this moment, but she had never considered how frightening it would be to actually approach one of these imposing figures. The guard looked enormous from her perspective, and his serious expression made him seem almost superhuman. But then Emma remembered why she was there and what she was trying to accomplish. She thought about her grandmother working 2 jobs and never complaining. She thought about all the other families around her who had saved and sacrificed to be there. She thought about her own parents, who she missed every single day, and how they had always taught her to be kind to others, especially when they were hurting. Taking a deep breath that seemed to come from her toes, Emma stepped over the rope barrier. The moment her small shoe touched the cobblestone on the restricted side of the barrier, several things happened at once. A security officer started moving in her direction. Several tourists began pointing and whispering. The other guards, trained to notice even the smallest irregularities, began to track her movement with their peripheral vision while maintaining their forward-facing stance. But Emma only had eyes for the guard she had chosen. She walked directly toward James Mitchell with the determined stride of someone on a mission. In her arms, Sir Snuggles bounced slightly with each step, the secret message hidden in his pocket waiting for its moment to be revealed. James noticed the small figure approaching him long before she reached his position. In his training, he had been taught to ignore distractions, to remain focused on his duty regardless of what happened around him. He had stood unmoved while tourists tried to make him laugh, while street performers did acrobatics just feet away from him, while rain soaked through his uniform during outdoor ceremonies. But something about this little girl was different. Maybe it was the serious expression on her young face that reminded him so much of Lucy when she was trying to be brave during her medical treatments. Maybe it was the way she walked with such purpose, as if she had something important to do, and nothing was going to stop her. Emma stopped directly in front of James, so close that she had to tilt her head all the way back to look up at his face. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. The imposing guard in his ceremonial uniform and the small girl with pigtails and a teddy bear. Up close, Emma could see that the guard's eyes were not cold and distant as she had expected. They were brown and kind, and there was something in them that looked like the same sadness she sometimes saw in her grandmother's eyes late at night when Rose thought Emma was asleep. James looked down at the child in front of him and felt his carefully maintained composure begin to crack. She couldn't have been much older than Lucy, and there was something about her earnest expression that reached straight through all his military training to touch his heart. Emma reached into Sir Snuggles' pocket and carefully pulled out the folded piece of paper. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her voice was clear and strong when she spoke. "Excuse me, Mr. Hine." "God," she said politely, exactly as her grandmother had taught her to address adults. "I have something very important to give you." The courtyard around them had gone almost completely quiet. The tourists had stopped taking photos and were watching this unprecedented interaction with fascination. The security officers had paused their approach, uncertain how to handle a situation that had never occurred before in the history of the Royal Guard. James felt every protocol and regulation he had ever learned warring with the instinct to respond to this child's obvious sincerity. He was not supposed to move, not supposed to speak, not supposed to acknowledge the existence of anyone around him while he was on duty. But as he looked down at Emma's upturned face and saw the carefully folded piece of paper in her small hand, James Mitchell made a decision that would echo through both their lives forever. He was going to break 500 years of tradition, and he was going to do it without a moment's regret. The little girl with the secret message was about to discover that sometimes when you reach out to help someone else, you end up saving yourself as well. And the guard, who had spent months feeling powerless to help his own sister, was about to learn that heroism sometimes comes in the smallest packages and arrives at exactly the moment you need it most. The world held its breath as Emma Johnson and James Mitchell stood face to face, two people from completely different worlds about to create a moment that would remind everyone watching what it truly meant to be human. Time seemed to stop in the courtyard of Buckingham Palace. The hundreds of tourists, the other guards, the security personnel, and even the pigeons seemed to pause as if the world itself was holding its breath. Emma stood before guard James Mitchell, with her folded piece of paper extended toward him, her brown eyes filled with hope and determination. James felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool London morning. Every fiber of his military training screamed at him to remain motionless, to ignore the child, to maintain the discipline that had been drilled into him through months of rigorous preparation. The consequences of breaking protocol while on duty at Buckingham Palace could end his career, disgrace his family's military tradition, and destroy everything he had worked so hard to achieve. But Lucy's letter was still folded against his heart, and something about this brave little girl reminded him so powerfully of his sister that he felt his resolve crumbling like sand. The child's earnest face, her careful politeness, the way she held her teddy bear protectively against her chest, it all spoke to something deeper than military regulations. Emma could see the internal struggle playing out in the guard's eyes. She had expected him to be like a statue, unmoving and unreachable. But up close she could see that he was very much human. There was kindness in his face, and sadness too, and something that looked like the same longing she felt when she missed her parents. "Please," Emma whispered so quietly that only James could hear her. "It's very important. It's for someone who needs to know that people care about them." Those words hit James like a physical blow. How could this child know exactly what he needed to hear? How could she understand, without knowing anything about him or his situation, that he was struggling with feeling helpless and far away from someone who needed him? The security officers were getting closer now, but they moved slowly, uncertain how to handle a situation that had never occurred before in the long history of the Royal Guard. Protocol dictated that they should remove the child immediately, but something about the scene unfolding before them made them hesitate. Officer Sarah Chen, a 10-year veteran of palace security, was the first to reach the barrier where Emma had crossed. She had seen every type of disruption imaginable: protesters, drunk tourists, people trying to get attention by acting out. But this was different. The little girl wasn't trying to cause trouble or make a scene. She was simply trying to deliver what appeared to be a message to one of the guards. Sarah found herself stopping just short of intervening. Her training told her to act, but her instincts as a mother of two young children told her to wait and see what would unfold. Sometimes, she had learned, the most important moments were the ones that couldn't be planned or controlled. Emma kept her hand extended toward James, the piece of paper trembling slightly in her small fingers. She had come so far and worked so hard to get to this moment. Weeks of planning, months of saving, hours of practicing what she would say. It all came down to this single moment in front of Buckingham Palace. James looked down at the paper in Emma's hand and made his decision. With a movement so subtle that most of the crowd missed it entirely, he shifted his rifle from his right hand to his left, freeing up his right arm. Then, for the first time in 500 years of Royal Guard history, an active duty guard broke protocol to accept something from a member of the public. James Mitchell reached down and gently took the folded piece of paper from Emma Johnson's outstretched hand. The moment their fingers touched, something electric seemed to pass between them. Emma felt a rush of relief and gratitude so powerful that tears sprang to her eyes. James felt a warmth that had nothing to do with his heavy uniform and everything to do with the simple human connection he had been missing for months. The crowd around them erupted in whispers and gasps. Cameras clicked and phone screens lit up as people began recording what they instinctively knew was a historic moment. But Emma and James were lost in their own bubble. Two people who had found each other across impossible circumstances. James carefully unfolded the piece of paper, and what he read there nearly broke his composure entirely. In Emma's careful 7-year-old handwriting, the message read, "Dear Mr. Guard, my name is Emma, and I am 7 years old. I know you have to stand very still and look serious, but I wanted you to know that someone thinks you are very brave and very important. I live with my grandma and she works very hard, but she brought me here to see you because she says you protect everyone, even people like us who don't have much money. I bet you have people at home who love you and miss you when you are standing here being brave. I wanted to tell you that what you do matters, and that someone far away is proud of you, even if you can't see them right now. I hope this note makes you feel less alone. Love, Emma. P.S. This is my bear, Sir Snuggles. He used to belong to my daddy, who is in heaven now. Grandma says when we miss someone, we should do something kind for someone else, so I am giving him to you to keep you company." As James read the note, Emma was carefully extracting Sir Snuggles from her backpack. The bear was small and worn, clearly beloved and cherished. His brown fur was soft from years of hugging, and he wore a tiny knitted sweater that looked handmade. Emma held him out toward James with the same solemnity with which she had offered the note. James stared at the teddy bear and felt something break open in his chest. This child was offering him her most precious possession, asking nothing in return except that he accept her gift of kindness. She didn't know about Lucy, didn't know about his struggles or his fears or his feeling of helplessness. But somehow, she had given him exactly what he needed. The note trembled in James's hand as he realized the full impact of what was happening. This little girl had seen past his uniform, past his role, past everything that was supposed to make him untouchable and unreachable. She had seen him as a human being who might need comfort and connection, just like everyone else. For a moment, James forgot where he was. He forgot about the crowds, the cameras, the consequences. He forgot about military protocol and centuries of tradition. All he could think about was this brave little girl who had risked getting in trouble just to make sure he knew that someone cared. James reached out with his left hand and gently accepted Sir Snuggles from Emma. The bear was warm from being held against her chest, and James could feel the love that had been poured into this small stuffed animal over the years. He clutched the bear carefully, as if it were made of the most precious material in the world. Emma smiled up at him, and it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. Her mission was complete. She had delivered her message and her gift, and she could see in the guard's eyes that both had been received and understood. But James wasn't finished. Standing there holding a child's teddy bear while on duty at Buckingham Palace, surrounded by hundreds of witnesses and multiple cameras, he made another decision that would have been unthinkable just minutes earlier. Guard James Mitchell began to smile. It started small, just a slight upturn at the corners of his mouth. But as he looked down at Emma's beaming face and felt the weight of Sir Snuggles in his arms, the smile grew until it transformed his entire appearance. The stern, untouchable guard disappeared, replaced by a young man who was deeply moved by an act of pure kindness. The crowd's whispers turned to cheers. People began applauding, not because they were watching a ceremony or a performance, but because they were witnessing something authentic and beautiful, and completely unexpected. They were seeing two human beings connect across all the barriers that society had placed between them. Emma clapped her hands together in delight. She had hoped the guard might accept her note, but she had never imagined he would smile at her. She felt proud and happy and more grown up than she had ever felt in her life. Officer Sarah Chen found tears in her own eyes as she watched the scene unfold. Instead of moving to break up the interaction, she found herself stepping back to give them more space. Sometimes, she realized, the most important security was the security that came from human kindness and connection. James carefully tucked Emma's note into his uniform pocket, right next to Lucy's letter. Then he did something else that had never been done in the history of the Royal Guard. He spoke to a member of the public while on duty. "Thank you, Emma," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Sir Snuggles and I will take very good care of each other." The little girl beamed up at him, her mission accomplished beyond her wildest dreams. She had set out to comfort a stranger, and instead she had created a moment that would be remembered and retold for generations. But neither Emma nor James knew that their story was just beginning. The cameras that had captured their interaction were already uploading images and videos that would spread across the world within hours. The moment of connection they had shared in the courtyard of Buckingham Palace was about to touch millions of lives and remind everyone who saw it of the power of simple human kindness. As Emma turned to make her way back to her grandmother, and James stood holding Sir Snuggles while tears ran down his cheeks, neither of them realized that they had just changed each other's lives forever. The little girl who had felt powerless in a big world had discovered her own strength, and the guard who had felt isolated and helpless had found hope in the most unexpected place. The royal protocol had been broken. But something far more important had been created in its place. Within 30 minutes of Emma Johnson placing Sir Snuggles into the arms of guard James Mitchell, the first photo had been uploaded to social media. A tourist from Germany named Klaus Weber had captured the exact moment when James reached down to accept Emma's teddy bear, and his wife had immediately posted it to her Instagram account with the caption, "Something magical is happening at Buckingham Palace." That single image would be shared over 2 million times in the first 24 hours. But Emma and her grandmother Rose were completely unaware of the digital wildfire they had sparked as they made their way to a small cafe near the palace for lunch. Emma chatted excitedly about meeting the guard. Her cheeks flushed with pride and happiness. She kept looking back toward the palace, hoping to catch another glimpse of James standing at his post with Sir Snuggles. Rose Johnson was still processing what she had witnessed. She had raised Emma to be kind and thoughtful, but she had never imagined her granddaughter would have the courage to approach one of the Queen's guards. Part of her was worried that Emma might have gotten in trouble, but mostly she was overwhelmed with pride at the little girl's compassion and bravery. "Grandma," Emma said as they sat down at a small table by the cafe window, "do you think the guard really liked Sir Snuggles? Do you think Daddy would be happy that I gave away his bear?" Rose reached across the table and took Emma's small hands in her work-worn ones. "Oh, darling," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Your daddy would be so proud of you. You saw someone who needed kindness, and you gave them the most precious thing you had. That's exactly what your father would have done." Meanwhile, back at Buckingham Palace, James Mitchell was experiencing the most emotionally intense day of his military career. Still standing at his post, still holding Sir Snuggles carefully against his chest, he could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on him. The other guards remained motionless at their positions, but James could sense their curiosity and concern about his unprecedented break from protocol. Captain William Hayes, the officer in charge of the day's ceremony, was facing a situation that wasn't covered in any manual or training program. Technically, James had violated multiple regulations by accepting items from a member of the public and by speaking while on duty. But the captain had also witnessed the genuine emotion of the interaction, and he could see that something profound had occurred. Captain Hayes made a decision that would prove to be as important as James's choice to accept Emma's gift. Instead of reprimanding James or removing him from his post, he chose to allow the young guard to continue his duty while holding the teddy bear. It was another break from centuries of tradition. But Hayes understood that some moments transcended regulations. As the hours passed, more and more people began to notice that something unusual was happening at Buckingham Palace. Word spread through the crowd of tourists that one of the guards was holding a child's teddy bear, and people began specifically seeking him out. Instead of the usual quick photos and move-on behavior typical of tourist sites, visitors started lingering, drawn by the story that was beginning to circulate. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, James's commanding officers had been notified about the situation. Major Patricia Reynolds arrived at the palace expecting to handle a disciplinary issue, but what she found instead was a guard who was performing his duties with more pride and focus than she had seen in years of service. James stood taller, his bearing more confident, his attention more acute. The teddy bear in his arms seemed to have given him strength rather than distraction. Major Reynolds observed him for over an hour before making her assessment, and what she concluded would change military protocol forever. At 4:30, as James's shift was nearing its end, something unprecedented happened. A second child approached the barrier where Emma had crossed earlier. This time it was a little boy, perhaps 6 years old, who had heard Emma's story from his parents and wanted to give the nice soldier one of his toy cars. The security officers, now aware that the morning's incident had been handled with discretion and compassion, allowed the second child to approach. James, still holding Sir Snuggles, carefully accepted the small red car from the boy and tucked it safely into his uniform pocket. By the time James's replacement arrived for the next shift, a small pile of gifts had accumulated at his feet. Flowers from an elderly woman who said he reminded her of her late son. A handwritten thank you note from a veteran who appreciated seeing kindness in uniform. A small British flag from a family of American tourists who had been moved to tears by Emma's story. But the real impact of Emma's actions was just beginning to unfold in the digital world. The photo Klaus Weber had taken was now accompanied by dozens of others, all captured by tourists who had witnessed the interaction between Emma and James. Videos began appearing on YouTube, TikTok, and Facebook, each telling slightly different versions of the story, but all capturing the same essential truth. Something beautiful had happened at Buckingham Palace. News outlets began picking up the story by evening. The BBC ran a segment on their 6 o'clock news titled, "Little Girl's Gift Touches Royal Guard's Heart." CNN International featured the story in their evening broadcast, calling it a moment of pure human connection. Sky News interviewed several witnesses who described the interaction as magical and life-changing. But it was when the story reached Lucy Mitchell in her hospital bed in Yorkshire that the true power of Emma's gesture became clear. Lucy had been having a particularly difficult day. The chemotherapy had left her weak and nauseous, and she had been feeling scared and alone despite the constant attention of the medical staff. When her mother arrived for evening visiting hours with a tablet computer and a huge smile on her face, Lucy assumed it was just another attempt to cheer her up. "Lucy, darling," her mother said, sitting on the edge of the hospital bed, "you need to see something amazing. It's about your brother James." Lucy watched the video of Emma approaching James, saw her brother's face transform as he read the little girl's note, witnessed the moment when he accepted Sir Snuggles with tears streaming down his cheeks. But most importantly, she saw something in her brother's expression that she hadn't seen since before her diagnosis. Hope. "Mummy," Lucy whispered, her voice weak but filled with wonder. Someone was kind to James because they knew he was worried about someone he loves. Someone was kind to him because of me. That realization that her brother's pain had been seen and acknowledged by a stranger, that someone had cared enough to reach out with comfort, gave Lucy a strength she hadn't felt in months. For the first time since beginning treatment, she felt like her struggle had meaning beyond just her own survival. Back in Manchester, Emma and Rose were having a quiet dinner when Rose's ancient mobile phone began buzzing with notifications. Rose rarely received calls or messages, so the sudden activity was alarming. When she saw that the messages were coming from friends, neighbors, and even people she didn't recognize, she began to worry that something was wrong. The first message was from Mrs. Dead, Patterson, Emma's teacher. "Rose, you need to see this. Emma is famous. Check the BBC website." With trembling fingers, Rose navigated to the BBC News website on her phone and found the story about Emma and the Royal Guard prominently featured on the homepage. There was Emma's photo, smiling up at James as he held Sir Snuggles. And the story described her as a 7-year-old girl whose simple act of kindness has captured hearts around the world. Emma looked over her grandmother's shoulder at the phone screen, her eyes wide with amazement. "Grandma, is that really me? Am I really on the news?" Rose pulled Emma close and felt tears streaming down her face. Her granddaughter, this precious child who had lost so much but still had so much love to give, had somehow managed to touch the entire world with her kindness. But the story was far from over. As news of Emma's gesture spread across social media and news outlets globally, something remarkable began to happen. People from around the world started sharing their own stories of small acts of kindness that had changed their lives. The hashtag #SirSnugglesKindness began trending internationally, with thousands of people posting photos and stories of times when a stranger's compassion had made all the difference. A businessman in Tokyo shared how a child's smile on the subway had helped him through his divorce. A teacher in Australia posted about a student who had left an encouraging note on her desk during the worst week of her career. A nurse in Canada described how a patient's family had given her a homemade card that helped her cope with the stress of the pandemic. Emma's simple act of giving her beloved teddy bear to a stranger had somehow given the entire world permission to acknowledge their own need for kindness and connection. People who had been feeling isolated and alone began to realize that they weren't the only ones who sometimes needed a reminder that someone cared. The story reached beyond social media and news outlets. Late-night talk show hosts discussed it. Morning show anchors teared up while reading it on air, and radio DJs dedicated entire segments to taking calls from listeners who wanted to share their own experiences of unexpected kindness. But perhaps most importantly, the story reached other children. Kids around the world began asking their parents if they could visit their local police stations, fire departments, and military bases to deliver drawings, cookies, and small gifts to the people who worked to keep them safe. Emma's courage had shown them that even small people could make a big difference. In hospitals, children undergoing treatment began making cards for their doctors and nurses. In schools, students started leaving encouraging notes for their teachers. In nursing homes, young visitors began bringing small gifts and drawings for the elderly residents. Emma Johnson had set out to comfort one lonely guard, but her act of kindness had started a global movement of compassion that would touch millions of lives. And the best part was, she was still just getting started. As the sun set over London that evening, James Mitchell finished his shift holding Sir Snuggles close to his heart, surrounded by gifts from strangers who had been inspired by a 7-year-old girl's courage. He had no idea that his sister Lucy was sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks, comforted by the knowledge that her brother had received the kindness he deserved. And in Manchester, Emma Johnson fell asleep clutching a printout of the news story about her day at Buckingham Palace, dreaming of all the other ways she might be able to spread kindness in a world that needed it so desperately. 6 months after Emma Johnson handed Sir Snuggles to guard James Mitchell, the world looked different through the lens of kindness. What had started as one child's simple gesture had grown into a global phenomenon that touched lives in ways no one could have predicted. The most remarkable change had occurred in Lucy Mitchell's hospital room in Yorkshire. The 8-year-old girl who had been fighting leukemia with quiet determination had become a symbol of hope for children in treatment centres around the world. The story of how her brother had been comforted by a stranger had given Lucy a sense of purpose that strengthened her more than any medicine ever could. Lucy's doctors were amazed by her progress. Dr. Sarah Williams, who had been treating childhood cancer for over 20 years, had never seen a patient respond so positively to treatment while also serving as an inspiration to others. Lucy spent her good days making cards and small gifts for other children in the hospital, always signing them, "From Lucy, James's sister." She has this incredible understanding, Dr. Williams explained to James during one of his visits, that kindness creates strength, both in the giver and the receiver. Watching her help other children has been one of the most beautiful things I've witnessed in my career. James had been granted special leave to visit his sister more frequently, a decision made possible by the global attention his story had received. The Royal Guard, recognizing the positive impact of his actions, had used his experience to create new protocols that allowed for more human interaction while maintaining the dignity and tradition of their service. Captain Hayes had been promoted to Major and placed in charge of developing these new guidelines, which became known as the Sir Snuggles Protocols. Guards were now trained to handle moments of genuine human connection with grace while maintaining their professional duties. The protocols recognized that sometimes the most important service a guard could provide was simply acknowledging the humanity in others. Emma's life had changed dramatically as well, but in ways that her grandmother Rose had carefully managed to keep grounded in their everyday reality. The media attention had been overwhelming at first, with reporters wanting to interview the little girl who had touched the world's heart. Rose had protected Emma from most of it, allowing only a few carefully selected interviews that focused on the importance of kindness rather than celebrity. The most meaningful interview had been with a children's television program that visited Emma and Rose at their small flat in Manchester. Emma, wearing her best dress and speaking with the serious tone she reserved for important occasions, had explained her philosophy to the interviewer. Sometimes grown-ups forget that everyone gets sad and lonely, even people who look very important and strong. My grandma taught me that when we're feeling sad about something we can't fix, we should look for something we can fix for someone else. I couldn't bring my mummy and daddy back, and I couldn't make my grandma not have to work so hard, but I could make sure the guard knew that someone cared about him. That interview clip had been viewed over 50 million times and translated into dozens of languages. Emma's words had been quoted in graduation speeches, printed on inspirational posters, and referenced in sermons and lectures around the world. But the real impact of Emma's actions could be seen in the thousands of small changes happening in communities everywhere. Schools had implemented Sir Snuggles Days, where children were encouraged to perform random acts of kindness. Hospitals had started programs where young patients created comfort items for healthcare workers. Police departments reported receiving an unprecedented number of thank you cards and small gifts from children in their communities. The phenomenon had even reached the highest levels of government and society. Queen Elizabeth II herself had requested a private meeting with Emma and Rose, which took place at Buckingham Palace on a quiet Tuesday morning, 6 months after the original incident. Emma, now 8 years old and slightly taller but still possessing the same earnest determination, had walked through the palace halls, holding her grandmother's hand and carrying a new teddy bear. a gift from children around the world who had heard that she had given away her original bear. The Queen, who had heard the full story from her staff and had been deeply moved by Emma's actions, greeted the little girl with warmth and genuine interest. They sat in a comfortable drawing room, drinking tea, well, Emma had hot chocolate, and talking about kindness, courage, and the responsibility that comes with touching other people's lives. "You know, my dear," the Queen had said to Emma, "in all my years of service I have learned that the most important thing any of us can do is to see the humanity in others and respond with compassion."
You understood that at 7 years old, better than many adults ever do.
Emma had listened carefully to the Queen's words and then asked, with the directness that only children possess, "Your Majesty, do you ever feel lonely when everyone is watching you, but no one really knows you?"
The Queen's eyes had filled with tears at the question, and she had reached over to squeeze Emma's hand.
But people like you remind me that we are all connected by our shared need for kindness and understanding. That meeting had remained private, but its impact on royal protocol was significant. The Queen had personally endorsed the new guidelines that allowed guards to accept small gifts and tokens of appreciation from children, recognizing that such interactions honored rather than diminished the dignity of royal service. James Mitchell had also met with the Queen in a formal ceremony where he was recognized for his service and for representing the best qualities of the Royal Guard. He had been promoted and given a special commendation, but, more importantly, he had been given the assignment he had requested, training new guards not just in protocol and procedure, but in the importance of maintaining their humanity while serving their duty. James kept Sir Snuggles with him always, not as a mascot or a curiosity, but as a reminder of the day when a child's courage had taught him that strength and vulnerability could coexist. The bear had become a symbol within the Guard of the importance of staying connected to the people they served. During his training sessions, James would tell new recruits Emma's story and explain how that moment had changed his understanding of what it meant to be a protector. "We stand guard not just over buildings and ceremonies," he would say, "but over the idea that in a world that can be harsh and uncertain, there are still people who believe in kindness and honor. When someone approaches you with genuine respect and compassion, responding with humanity doesn't diminish your duty, it fulfills it." The impact on Emma's own community had been profound as well. Manchester had embraced their local hero, not with overwhelming attention, but with the kind of supportive pride that made Emma feel loved rather than pressured. Local businesses had quietly helped Rose reduce her work hours so she could spend more time with Emma, and the community had rallied around them in practical ways that made their daily life easier without making them feel like charity cases. Emma's school had integrated her story into their curriculum, not as a way to make her feel special, but as a teaching tool about empathy, courage, and the ripple effects of kindness. Mrs. Rick Patterson reported that Emma's classmates had become notably more supportive of each other and more aware of when someone might need encouragement or help. But perhaps the most beautiful outcome of Emma's actions was something that took place far from cameras and media attention, in the countless small interactions between strangers that happened every day around the world. A businessman in New York started carrying extra umbrellas to give to people caught in the rain, inspired by Emma's story. A teenage girl in Brazil began tutoring younger children for free, remembering how a small act of kindness could change someone's entire day. An elderly man in Japan started leaving encouraging notes for his postal carrier, thinking about how a stranger's compassion had comforted a lonely guard. These actions created their own ripple effects, spreading outward in patterns too complex to track, but too powerful to ignore. Teachers reported students being kinder to each other. Healthcare workers noticed more families expressing gratitude. Customer service representatives found themselves dealing with more patient and understanding customers. Emma and James had unknowingly started a quiet revolution, one that operated on the principle that everyone carries invisible burdens and everyone deserves to be seen and valued. Their moment at Buckingham Palace had given people permission to believe that their small actions mattered, that kindness was not weakness but strength, and that the courage to reach out to a stranger could change the world. On the first anniversary of their meeting, Emma and her grandmother returned to Buckingham Palace. This time, they were special guests, invited by the Royal Guard to witness a new tradition that had been established in honor of Emma's courage. Every month, on the anniversary date of Emma's visit, the Guards would participate in a community connection ceremony where children from local schools, hospitals, and community organizations were invited to the palace to meet the Guards, learn about their service, and participate in an exchange of small gifts and messages of appreciation. Emma watched with pride and joy as dozens of children, some shy, some bold, some healthy, Some clearly fighting their own battles approached the guards with drawings, letters, and small tokens of kindness. The guards, now trained in the protocols that had grown from Emma's original gesture, accepted each gift with dignity and genuine appreciation. James Mitchell, now a sergeant, was present for the ceremony. When he saw Emma in the crowd, he approached her, with Sir Snuggles still tucked carefully in his uniform. The bear showed signs of gentle wear from months of being carried, but he was clearly well loved and well cared for. "Emma," James said, kneeling down to her level, as he had learned to do with all the children who visited, "I want you to know that Sir Snuggles and I think about you every day. Your kindness saved my sister and changed my life. But more than that, it reminded the whole world what we're capable of when we choose love over fear." Emma smiled up at him, older now and more aware of the impact her actions had created, but still possessing the same essential kindness that had driven her to approach a stranger with nothing but love in her heart. "James," she said, using his first name as he had given her permission to do, "I think Sir Snuggles was meant to be with you all along. Maybe Daddy sent me here that day because he knew you needed him more than I did." As they stood together in the courtyard of Buckingham Palace, surrounded by children and guards creating new connections and new possibilities for kindness, Emma Johnson and James Mitchell represented something that the world desperately needed. Proof that in a time of division and uncertainty, the simple choice to see each other as human beings worthy of love and compassion could create miracles. Emma's secret message had been delivered, but its impact would continue to unfold for generations to come, carried forward by every person who had been touched by her story and inspired to create their own moments of unexpected grace. The little girl who had once felt small in a big world had discovered that the smallest acts of love can have the biggest consequences, and that sometimes the most important messages are the ones we deliver, not with words, but with the courage to care about a stranger's heart.